Hello, welcome to the channel. My name's Matt, and today we're going to do a book review for Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. This book has already been shortlisted for the 2022 Booker Prize and was longlisted for the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction, so quite well acclaimed. It's based on or inspired by the 2017 overthrow of Mugabe, the unexpected fall of Mugabe in Zimbabwe after almost 40 years in power. So this story is set in the fictional country of Jidada, and it's populated by animals, hence there's the Animal Farm comparison, which we'll come on to later in this discussion. But what we have Old Horse, who's been ruling the country for about 40 years. We see his fall from grace, fall from power. So we then follow the drama that unfolds, the optimism of new beginnings. We see the ruthlessness of enforcing an image of absolute power. We see the decline of a country and the populace within it. We see the optimism and fortitude required to stand up to such a all-encompassing regime. This is important for itself. There's pain, there's suffering, there's the ruthlessness of it all, there's the hope, the desire for change, there's despair, there's anger, there's rage, there's optimism, there's love, there's lies, there's truth. This is an important story to tell, but doesn't necessarily make it a well-told story. There are some remarkable scenes in this book, and one that sticks with me is when we see Destiny, who's one of the characters that we follow through this story arc. We find some horrific things that have happened to her family in the past and to her. And that scene where we understand what the defenders like the police force, the army, the enforcers of the regime have done to her family. It's horrific, it's brutal, it's emotional, but it leads to a scene of such loving affection between mother and daughter. It's incredibly heartwarming and touching as well, which is strange after such a brutal and horrific scene that you witness through the book. Another wonderful use of imagery is red butterflies that NoViolet Bulawayo uses throughout the story to give such imagery to and evoke emotion. And it's done really well. I don't want to say too much about what it's used for, and you'll see if you read the book how it's used and how it's utilised. And it is a beautiful use of imagery and the red and how it's used at the end within the flag of Jidada as well. So there's some beautiful imagery, there's some really powerful scenes captured within this story, and it is worth the praise that she gets as a very accomplished writer already. I know I think she had a previous Booker Prize shortlist as well, so she's obviously an incredibly talented writer, and there are some very beautiful, emotional, strong scenes within this book. Now, having said that, I did struggle with this book overall, and there's a few things around the writing style that really almost made me DNF and not finish this book. So we have a persistent use of repetition and lists used by NoViolet Bulawayo throughout the story. And in some cases, the repetition works, and it works really well. So we have things where we're using political propaganda, and we're using that repetition that is used in politics. That works quite well. And also when they talk about the country itself, almost every time that you hear the country name, it is said as, this is Jidada with a da and another da. And that gives you an impression, depending on who's saying how it's said, you get an impression of pride or hope that it should be better, and various other things. But you also get, because of da and another da, you get the view of the patriarchal society of which Jidada is actually built upon, whether that's been the politics or society itself. And so you get that view throughout the book, that reminder of what the oppression is, or some of the oppression is within the book. So that works well. There are parts, however, that really didn't work for me on the repetition and the lists. There's some elements where the author takes a short phrase and it gets repeated over and over and over again, one after another, after another. I'm going to do it now, but continuously for what seems like an age. And I'll admit I listened to this on audio, so that may have an impact, but some of the phrases that were repeated over and over and over and over again, it was too many repetitions. And it got to the point where even I was getting to a point where I was fast forwarding it 15 seconds and they were still repeating it, and fast forwarding another 15 seconds and they were still repeating it. Now, it may be that you see it on the page and visually it's more impactful because you see a half a page or a page of one phrase being repeated numerous times, and you would see it and you would flick through it and you wouldn't read every single statement on that page. You would flick through and you get the impression and the impact of that constant repetition without having to listen to the poor narrator repeat it over and over and over again. So that was tedious. It was in some cases painful, and there was quite a bit of it throughout the book, some more excessive than others, but it was a tool that was used, as I say, for the propaganda elements and some elements it worked. For some elements, for me, it really threw me out and got me quite frustrated with the storytelling in places. So also on the way the story is told, NoViolet Bulawayo also involves and it incorporates social media within her storytelling. And there's an element, and it's only a small part, but again, it comes back to the frustration and potentially of listening to it on audio rather than reading physical books, where we get a news feed or a feed of messages from a social media app of people replying and responding to different messages from previous users as well. And I would imagine on the page that works better because you can see it and you can sort of flick who's responding to who, but audibly, it didn't work. I wasn't sure who was messaging who, and you'd get the username and then the message, and it would be responding to another username, which was a little while ago. And if it was on the page, you could flick back, but on an audio, it didn't work. Fortunately, it was only a small section, but again, a little bit of frustration. Add that to the list, and I was really considering DNFing it at certain points throughout this story. Going back to the beginning of this book review, I'm really glad I didn't, because there are some really powerful scenes that are impactful within it, so it's worth sticking with, but the writing style does great at certain points. Right, so let's get on to the animal farm element. The country of Jidada is populated by animals, and we have various different animals within it. So you have Old Horse, who's the political leader. You have the goat, whose destiny is a goat. You have various other characters and different animals within it. And therefore and because it's a time of political turmoil, there's obvious comparisons are made to, George Orwell's Animal Farm. George Orwell's Animal Farm, as a novella, is incredible. It's a classic, it's a well-known classic. I'm not going to storyline, but it's based on communism, Stalinism and communism in 1917. And the use of animals is vital to the storyline, and the animals are animals. And what I mean by that is their physicality is important within the storyline. So in Glory, the animals are very much humanized. They do human things, they have mobile phones, they're on social media, and they didn't feel like animals. And I found that I was visualizing them most of the time as people, as humans, not as animals. And then you'd get a part in the story where suddenly something would happen and it would trigger that there was an animal. They would pick up a cup with their hooves or whatever the line was, and it would feel clunky and it would throw me out, and it wouldn't feel right because I'd been visualizing them as humans rather than animals, and there was so much human activity within that rather than animal activity that the use of that device did not work for me. I did not visualize animals. The only group then that worked for me as animals was the defenders as dogs. That worked visually for me. I could see that, and that felt real. And the use of dogs attacking, biting, using their teeth and claws, that visually worked. That metaphorically worked as well. But for the other animals, it didn't work, and I just couldn't remember what animal was what. And there was different, there was a cat at one point, there was a pig, there was a bull, there was various different animals. I just couldn't keep track of it, and I was also confused about which animals were part of society and which weren't. So were the insects and the like the ants or the flies and the birds, were they part of the society or were they actually animals? It didn't work for me. I wonder if by making them animals rather than humans, it gave the author more flexibility, more freedom to give the story that she wanted, rather than it being based purely on the 2017 Zimbabwean coup. And there is more to it than just a retelling of those events. So I wonder if there's that. I also wonder if for people who are closer to the trauma of these events and the trauma of the regimes that we're discussing, whether the use of the animal would enable them to process that easier. I don't know. I'm not that close to the trauma. I've obviously seen it on the news and read about it through that way, but I'm not directly impacted per se by it. So it's difficult. But for me, that animal analogy didn't work. And there's a point in there, even references, it says this is not Animal Farm, this is Jidada with a da and another da. And it's not Animal Farm. It's a very different story. It's a full-length novel rather than novella. The animals side of it wasn't as critical to the story. It was a device that just didn't work, and it was frustrating on that front. Overall, I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that I finished it and stuck with it. There were some wonderful scenes, as I mentioned at the beginning, a couple of them that really resonated with me and were very powerful. Overall, I think, especially listening to an audiobook, it was a struggle and it was painful. The repetition, the use of lists, the social media aspect didn't really work for the audible experience. And that's no discredit to the narrator, the voice actor, who was very good. No complaints about that. I think it was just more the context and the text she was using was very difficult to produce a very good audible experience for the listener. Would it be of difference if I'd seen the physical copy and read a physical book? Maybe. If you were going to read it, I would very much encourage you to get the physical copy or read a physical copy rather than the audible version. Overall, it's an interesting story about a very interesting period of time and about a brutal regime and the suffering of the people within that community and the hope and the fortitude to overcome or stand up, maybe not overcome, but stand up to such a regime is worth telling. I just struggle with the format, the structure and the writing style and some of the choices that the authors made to tell that story, which didn't work for me and my experience of, in this case, listening to it through the audio experience. I'm not convinced it'd work on the page either. I know others disagree, and obviously it is highly regarded with the prize since it has been shortlisted and longlisted for, but that was my experience of reading Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. So that was my book review for Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo. If you found it useful, please do like and subscribe. And if you have read it, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of this book? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'll be interested to hear your views. But thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next one. Goodbye.